You know, I've been traveling a little bit around Canada with Sheila Gunn Reid and Kia Simone. Kian, of course, is our documentary filmmaker here at Rebel News, and Sheila is the star of a film we have just released about the persecution of churches across Canada during the pandemic lockdowns. And there's about 5 vignettes that tell the story. Arthur Pavlovsky being one of them, the Church of God in Aylmer, Pastor Phil out in St. John, etc. And the overwhelming and disproportionate police response is shocking and appalling, and watching police enter churches with their hands on their firearms is disgusting and a disgrace. But what I couldn't help but think was, if it hadn't been 5 churches across Canada, but rather had it been 50 or 500 or maybe even 5,000, there's no way the police could have stopped it. Not only would they have had no moral authority, the people would obviously have been against them, but there's just not enough police, just not enough courthouses, just not enough prosecutors to go after everyone. But alas, there were just 5 churches, and so the police ganged up on them. And I felt the same way about pretty much every other establishment. I just referred to the religious establishments. You'd think the churches would answer to a higher power, but whether it was the media or the law courts or the College of Physicians and Surgeons, everyone was complicit. I shouldn't say everyone, because there were a handful of elected officials who said no. And that handful, there were at least 4 of them in Ontario. I refer in part to Randy Hillier, the swashbuckling former Conservative member of provincial parliament. Roman Baber is another name that probably rings a bell, very principled lawyer who opposed the lockdowns. Belinda Karahelios is another. There were a handful at the federal level. Derek Sloan, the former member of parliament for the Conservatives. Now, these folks, I wish there had been 10 times as many. I wish they had cohered together and started a sort of anti-lockdown political party, but alas, they were divided. But I must give a shout out to Randy Hillier and Derek Sloan for putting their money where their mouth is, and like Maxime Bernier, going to a public event outdoors to exercise their freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. And both Randy Hillier and Derek Sloan were charged with this fake crime. And they didn't buckle, and they didn't ask the Queen for mercy and say, "Oh, please, Master, I'll plead guilty." In fact, they fought. And 2 weeks ago, they won. The Crown dropped the charges against both men in return for a very modest gift to charity by Derek Sloan and Randy Hillier doing a few hours in a food bank. I don't think that either man should have done anything, but I'm sure neither minded giving a gift to charity. They're charitable people. I'm delighted to say that we have with us today the lawyer who secured this stay of prosecution for both men. His name is Chris Fleury. He works with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. He's based in Belleville, Ontario, and he joins us now online. Chris, great to meet you, and congratulations. Tell me what it was like dealing with the police and the Crown prosecutors, because if I'm not mistaken, these charges go back 2 years. For 2 years, they've been coming at you. You would think that there's no actual crime in this country, no stabbings in the subway, no gun crime, for them to put prosecutorial resources behind getting 2 politicians 2 years later.
Thanks, Ezra. It's a pleasure to be with you. If I could I want to sort of correct one point in your introduction.
Sure.
It's actually much worse than that you point out. The crime or the provincial offense that these 2 individuals were charged with, it's not that they dared to gather and to protest. It's that they dared to leave their house. So if you remember back in April of this is April through June of 2021, the Ontario government invoked the second stay-at-home order, which said that a person may not leave their house leave their residence unless they're leaving for one of 29 what the Ontario government essentially deemed to be essential purposes. So 4 of which had to do with pets, actually. uh, which seem to, in my mind, get more preference than children in Ontario. But that's another story. So they're charged with having the temerity to leave their residence, and that's what the essence of the Crown's case was.
That's incredible. That is literally a police state. If you cannot leave your house, it's clearly a violation of our Charter of Rights, freedom of mobility, freedom of association, freedom of assembly. There's no scientific basis whatsoever. There's no pandemic exception in our Charter of Rights, by the way. How many other people were charged with this fake offense? Because it looks awful lot to me like Randy Hillier and Derek Sloan were targeted by the police and the prosecution. Obviously, countless people left their homes. I was living in Ontario during that period of time, and I didn't obey that law for 1 minute. Were there a lot of people charged under this bizarre and North Korea-style law, or did they just go after political leaders like Derek Sloan and Randy Hillier?
So I represented 4 individuals who were charged in relation to that protest. The other 2 are Mr. Henry Hildebrandt and Mr. Aaron Rock, both of whom are religious leaders who spoke at the protest. Generally speaking, the police seem to target leaders and organizers and speakers at the protest, as opposed to just the individuals who peacefully gather.
I'm not surprised. I think the authoritarian bully, I suppose there's a small devil and angel within each of us, and the authoritarian bully within police and prosecutors certainly had its time to shine then. Tell me, how many prosecutors and police, by your estimate, did you deal with over the last 2 years? I imagine there was a police officer who issued the ticket, and then there was perhaps another police officer, and then there was a prosecutor, maybe more than one. I'm just trying to get some measure of the public resources that were put towards hounding Randy Hillier and Derek Sloan for 2 years.
There is, and I should clarify, Ezra, I haven't been acting for Mr. Sloan and Mr. Hillier since 2021. I came on board with the Justice Center in January. Before that, I was doing a lot of criminal defense work and suing insurance companies and a more traditional legal practice. Since I came on board, I'm representing individuals all across the province, well-known individuals and politicians, religious leaders, and lesser-known individuals. The amount of resources spent is, quite frankly, is extraordinary. In some cases, there are bylaw officers that are giving out these tickets, so individuals who would normally be giving out parking violations. But in some cases, and in Stratford in particular, there were a number of officers who showed up at this protest and took very detailed notes and did a very detailed investigation in support of the Crown's case.
What in the end made the Crown cut a deal? And I can imagine if there was a risk of some sort of a conviction and penalty, and if the 2 men were told, look, just work in the food bank for a day, you do that anyways, give $100 to charity, you do that anyways, and this whole thing's over. I can imagine it made sense just for the men to do it. But, you don't have 2 years worth of police investigation, 2 years worth of prosecutorial chasing to end with a whimper like that. Something must have changed. What or who made the Crown blink?
It's difficult to say, and I don't want to speak for the Crown Attorney. What I can say is that one of the most frustrating aspects of defending, again, these cases all over the province, is the lack of uniformity of treatment. That even Mr. Hillier, who is facing charges in relation to essentially the exact same conduct of attending a peaceful protest in over a half a dozen now jurisdictions across the province. Many of those charges were withdrawn in the early days. Many have been, or some I should say, have been what I would call diverted, meaning that they entered into an agreement to make a charitable donation or to do community service. And then in other cases, the Crown is seeking very large fines, and it's quite frankly, it's difficult to make sense of. In a certain sense, I have some sympathy for the prosecutors that they're not given any guidance on this. They know that if an individual is charged and they're not an organizer, there's no minimum fine, and it's $100,000 maximum fine. But the prosecution has enormous discretion within that range. And to be clear, no one's talking about a $100,000 fine for any of these individuals. But there are certainly fines into the $5,000 range that prosecutors are talking about. And other prosecutors are exercising their discretion to withdraw the charges, stay the charges, divert the charges. And it is, quite frankly, it's difficult to make heads or tails of why a particular decision is made.
Well, I think that chaos and the punitive nature of it was the point, actually.